Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our University of Missouri Extension Leasing Series designed to help farmers and property owners with leasing arrangements. I'm Julie Harker, News Strategist with Kapner Extension. Katie Neuner, Regional Extension Specialist in Ag Business, is with me tonight to talk about livestock leasing, specifically cattle leasing. Welcome, Katie.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Julie. I have been an ag business specialist with MU Extension for 7 years. I'm housed in Lafayette County, Missouri, which is about 45 minutes east of Kansas City. I've been educating on ag leases since early in my extension career. I have taught several areas of leasing, both in person and virtually over the years.
I'm curious to know who contacts you more about cattle leases. Is it the herd owner or operator?
I've been contacted by both. However, I would have to say that I've talked to more owners looking for someone to rent their cattle than operators looking to rent cows.
Why do you think herd owners contact you more than operators do?
We have an aging farmer population in Missouri. Most people are getting to the point where it is hard for them to care for their cattle, especially in the winter months. They are concerned with who will take care of their cattle if their heirs have no interest in farming. One cattle producer comes to mind who came into my office several months ago. He has maintained a closed herd of Hereford cattle for over 40 years. His children are not living in the area and they don't have any interest in moving home. He was specifically looking for ways to keep his herd intact. It's becoming more difficult for him to take care of them himself. So we discussed cattle leasing as a potential solution to his concerns.
All right, so let's all take a look at this first video, which introduces us to cattle leasing.
This video, created by the University of Missouri Agricultural Business and Policy Extension Program, provides introductory information on cattle leases. Most people think of leasing real estate, land, and buildings. Livestock are also leased. Cattle leasing involves a livestock owner agreeing to have a livestock operator, the tenant, care for and benefit from the livestock herd. The operator and owner enter into a lease to advance both of their interests. Livestock owners may benefit from cattle leases by receiving rental income and, perhaps, capital gains on livestock. However, the risk of death loss in the breeding herd can reduce income. A livestock owner can maintain a breeding herd using the labor of the livestock operator. A livestock lease can also help transition herd ownership to an operator. The livestock owner may not replace cull cows, instead allowing the livestock operator to add replacement heifers to the herd. Over time, this practice increases the livestock operator's ownership of the herd. A tax professional can give insight into how a livestock lease impacts the livestock owner's tax liability. For example, livestock owners do not need to pay self-employment tax on unearned income from a well-crafted cash lease. But the livestock owner with a livestock share lease would still pay self-employment taxes. The livestock operator benefits from leasing by having access to cattle without a large cash outlay normally required to purchase cattle. This often increases the size of the herd the livestock operator can obtain. The livestock operator may also be able to grow his own herd by retaining calves raised in the leased herd. Interaction with the livestock owner during the lease can also give the operator valuable experience in herd management. All leases must answer some common questions. When does the agreement start and how long does it last? When will shared expenses be settled? When will payment be made to the livestock owner? Who provides the labor? Cattle lease negotiations also involve questions unique to livestock production. When does culling occur? What determines whether an animal should be culled? How are cull animals handled? Questions about the beginning and ending quality of cattle leased may be challenging. What body condition score is the livestock operator required to keep the animals? Which party pays for veterinary or breeding expenses? Other questions include, where will the animals be fed and housed? How will they be cared for and transported? Who provides the bulls? What quality of bull is expected to be used? Sometimes the only animal leased is a bull. Bulls are expensive to purchase and to feed throughout the year. A leased bull is usually only leased for the breeding season, during which the tenant feeds and provides veterinary care for the bull. Herd health can be a concern when leasing bulls. Arranging for a veterinarian to inspect bulls before leasing and introducing bulls into the herd can reduce spreading disease. Experience among cattle producers who have used leases suggests keeping the lease simple. This could mean making the cattle lease totally independent of any other lease, such as pasture. As with all leases, rental rate negotiations start with estimating contributions of both the livestock owner and livestock operator. Budgets published by University Extension Services provide a framework for estimating each party's contribution. A written lease is essential with a livestock lease. Written lease forms provide good templates for livestock owner and operator discussions. Written forms raise questions to ask and provide a location to record agreements made. The abundance of decisions required for both the livestock owner and livestock operator necessitate writing the lease provisions down for future reference. Over the years, conditions may change that require the lease to be renegotiated. A written lease provides a framework of questions to discuss and come to agreement. University Extension resources can provide additional insights and education for both livestock owners and operators.
All right, good information. As always, we welcome your questions, and Katie will be happy to answer them in the second half of our program. This video, Katie suggested that livestock owners and operators answer several questions before they enter into a livestock lease. What are some of the most common questions you get asked about cattle leasing?
Yeah, Julie, some of the most common questions I get asked are, how is the cost of the lease determined? How do I find an owner or livestock operator who is interested in leasing? And where do I find a lease example to be able to look at and review?
Are there any other recommendations that you have, maybe ideas that you share with livestock owners and operators that they don't always ask you?
Yes, one of the recommendations I give is to consider a lease that is a longer term. Writing a lease for a 3 or a 5-year term gives more security to both the livestock owner and operator. You can revisit the lease every year and amend it to negotiate issues if they arise, but just remember that if you do modify the lease, you need to sign and date the addendum and include it with the original lease agreement.
In that video, they talked about bull leasing, which sounds like it makes pretty good economic sense. Are there any concerns that a bull owner or renter should be aware of specifically?
Yes, and I would recommend providing a breeding soundness exam at the beginning of the lease and when the bull is returned to the owner. Diseases like trichomoniasis can spread through a herd, and you will want to protect from that. Trick, as it's called in short, can reduce calf production by decreasing fertility and inducing abortions in cows. Developing a good relationship with a veterinarian who can perform these exams is an important part of a lease agreement.
So how might someone wanting to enter into a cattle lease go about finding someone with whom to lease?
Being active in a local cattlemen's group is always a good way to get to know others in the cattle industry. Having conversations with local veterinarians, Farm Bureau organizations, and even checking with your local extension office are other resources that you can reach out to as well.
Good advice. The video suggested keeping the lease simple, and it gave that example of keeping pasture leases separate from livestock leases. Why is simplicity in a lease so important?
Simplicity is important. Complex leases can be harder to manage. Simplicity does not mean that an operator cannot lease both pasture and livestock from the same person. However, if the pasture and livestock lease is a single agreement, it is likely to become out of date faster. The livestock lease might specify that the operator will gradually own more shares of the herd on the land. As the percentage of livestock ownership changes, the lease needs to change as well. It's just best to have 2 separate leases, one that answers all the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions about the pasture lease, and another that answers the same questions about the livestock lease.
All right, so we'll watch this next video, which gives us insight into how to calculate rental rates and how to negotiate the lease.
This video, created by the University of Missouri Agricultural Business and Policy Extension Program, provides information on calculating cattle cash and share leases. Cattle leases fall into two broad categories: cash leases and share leases. The difference between the two is how the livestock owner is compensated for her contribution. Both cash and share leases require the livestock owner and livestock operator to determine and value their contributions to production so they can create an equitable lease. Cash leases occur when the livestock operator agrees to pay the livestock owner in cash for her contribution, the livestock. Cows are normally rented on a per head, per year basis. In a cattle cash lease, the operator retains all income from the calves produced. The livestock owner retains open or cull cow sale revenue, unless specified otherwise in the agreement. Cash leases give the operator more control over herd management decisions. The livestock owner is not involved in day-to-day management. Generally, the operator covers all operating expenses, like feed, veterinary care, and labor. Livestock owners may find share leases an attractive way to maintain an existing herd with labor from an operator who has a personal stake in the outcome. Share leases may also be a useful way to transfer herd ownership over time. Livestock share leases permit operators to reduce operating expenses, invest less capital, and gain experience raising cattle. Share leases require substantial communication between the operator and the livestock owner. Information shared includes an accurate account of expenses and revenue, cows determined open after breeding, number and condition of calves born, and dates of key activities, such as weaning. Trust between both parties is necessary for a successful share lease. The contributions of both owner and operator are the foundation for calculating either cash rental payments or shares of calves produced. A published cattle production budget provides a starting point for determining contributions. Adjust the budget to reflect the actual production and marketing situation. Then, use the modified budget to determine how much of each expense item each person will provide. For cash leases, the livestock owner needs to reasonably account for her annual cost of providing the cow herd. This includes accounting for dead cows, cull cow sales, and the cost of replacement heifers, if provided by the livestock owner. The payment terms are determined when the lease is agreed upon. The livestock operator calculates how much can be paid to the livestock owner in a cash lease by estimating his revenue and costs. The revenue remaining after all non-rent costs are paid is the return to livestock, risk and management. This sets the extreme upper bound of rent that can be paid to the livestock owner. Every dollar of this upper bound rental rate that is paid in rent is one less dollar the tenant receives for management and risk. In share leases, both livestock owner and livestock operator determine a percentage contribution and split revenue by the same percentage. The herd owner and the operator would mutually agree who pays for specific items, such as feed, vet expense, and machinery. Labor and management are also recognized as costs. Generally, the operator contributes the largest portion of labor. By listing the contributions of each into a single table, the percentage contribution of each is calculated. In this example, the livestock owner would get 40% of the revenues from production. The operator would get 60%. Although percentages do not always compute so evenly, there's no reason to not use the exact percentages, since they have taken the time to calculate and agree upon each of their contributions. As with all businesses, livestock leasing involves risk, uncertain market and production achievements. Share leases split the risks between livestock owner and operator. Discussing these uncertainties prior to entering a lease helps each party understand the risk they are assuming and plan how to reduce unacceptable risks. Having done all the work to arrive at an agreeable lease, it is wise to finalize it by writing down the decisions made. Properly agreed and signed leases help both livestock owner and livestock operator remember what was decided, and that can help settle disputes that may arise. Lease forms and examples of written leases can be found at aglease101.org. You can get additional leasing help by calling your local MU Extension office and asking to speak with the Agriculture and Business Management Extension Specialist.
And luckily, we have an ag business specialist with us this evening who is happy to take your questions at the end. So please keep those coming in the chat box. Wanted to ask you about the video mentioning cash and share leases of livestock. Do you talk more about cash or share leases with cattle owners and operators?
I would say share leases are more popular among cattle producers. Most cattle producers are looking for ways to either transfer their herd to new owners over time or to get help with labor without having to hire an employee. For example, feed costs, veterinary expense, and supplies may be shared while the cattle owner provides land and the tenant provides the labor. In some share leases, cash does not exchange hands, but ownership percent of the cattle. The goals of the livestock owner and operator determine how the shares are established.
Okay, so one of the principles of leasing that's been taught repeatedly during this session on ag leases is that the contribution of both property owner, in this case, the livestock owner, and the tenant be recognized, and that this relative contribution be used in establishing the share lease. What are some ways in valuing the contribution of each person?
Yeah, so each person will want to come to the table with their dollar estimate of their contribution. The challenge comes when a person undervalues the other party's contribution and overvalues their contribution. Having documentation or justification for the value each person estimates helps in communication and negotiation. The University of Missouri Extension publishes cattle planning budgets every year. These budgets serve two roles in livestock lease negotiations. First, they list most of the expense categories that occur in cattle production. This prevents overlooking important contributions. This list can be used to make sure that all typical expenses are assigned to be covered by the livestock owner, the operator, or both. The second benefit of the MU Extension cattle budgets to leasing is that they can serve as a measure for how reasonable each party's valuation of contribution is. The values in the published budgets are an average or a forecast that might not exactly match the reality on the ground for a specific lease. But if an expense, say for veterinary or drug costs, is a lot higher or lower than the budget, this needs to be a discussion point. Why is it higher or lower? If the operator reports it as significantly lower, does the livestock owner have confidence that the cows will be adequately cared for? If it is significantly higher, why is that necessary? The same can be asked for purchase feed, labor, machinery costs, and other expenses.
What advice would you like to give to someone interested in entering a cattle lease?
So some advice would be, as a herd owner, you need to be prepared. If you have not kept good records, it will be harder to know your cost and a desired rental rate. You need to be honest and transparent. If a herd owner is not able to or willing to answer questions on cost and profitability, they might not be ready to enter into a lease agreement. They should be able to provide health records, calving records, and financial records. We have several record-keeping tools through MU Extension if anyone needs more information. As an operator, be sure to value your time appropriately. Labor is usually undervalued. Also, get involved with your local cattlemen's group. Offer to work as paid labor to get experience with managing and caring for a herd. Talk to your local vet, as they can know who is looking to downsize or if someone is open to a discussion on leasing cows as well.
So when a livestock owner finds a potential operator or vice versa, what recommendations would you give them as they begin to investigate whether a lease between them is likely going to be successful?
For both parties, open, honest conversations are key. These agreements might take a while to draw up, and that's okay. You might need to meet several times to come to terms on all the details. You need to establish trust and confidence in the person you're entering in the agreement with. Land can be abused, but it's always going to be there next year. When you're dealing with cattle, they can die and your asset is lost. A well thought out and crafted lease can give the best outcomes for both parties.
Excellent information, Katie. Thank you so much. And we're delighted that some questions have rolled in. So we're going to start that portion of our program this evening. The first question comes in this form. I'm working on a cow share agreement. Should I include replacement heifers or leave that to a third party?
So, good question. And a lot of that depends on the goals of the operator and the cattle herd owner. So if your goals are to retain those heifers, you would want to include them in the shares as you build your herd. If your goals are to introduce new genetics, you might be selling those heifers and then they would be shared as revenue in the share agreement.
Okay, very good. Here's another question. Is it wise to include a clause or provision in my leasing agreement related to drought? And if so, how enforceable would this provision be?
Drought is definitely a hot topic now as we are just exiting a drought in the state of Missouri that did create some financial hardship for a lot of cattle producers. So it might not be a bad idea to include some provisions regarding if a drought does occur, will maybe there be a shift in shares or, potentially a way to work around those adverse weather conditions that we can face. Also, I would definitely recommend looking into risk management products such as pasture range and forage insurance. Those types of products can actually help with the burden of drought if it is to occur as well.
Which brings me to a question I've been wanting to ask you. So what types of insurance might be important for each party in a livestock lease to have?
So yeah, almost every type of business carries some sort of a general liability insurance. The same with livestock leasing and ownership. So in a lease agreement, both the livestock owner and the operator will likely want to purchase separate liability policies, because both are likely to be liable if something goes wrong. If the livestock are grazed on someone else's land, the pasture owner will also likely want to have liability insurance. The most visible liability issue is livestock getting out of the pasture onto a road and being hit by a car. The cow is owned by the livestock owner, so they will benefit from liability insurance. The cow is being managed by the operator, so he will likely need insurance as well. Pasture owners also benefit from liability insurance. An example of this is that recently a farmer had multiple cattle die from licking batteries that had been abandoned in an area that livestock did not normally graze. The pasture owner's liability insurance paid for the value of the cattle in that case. So liability insurance by all parties is normal. While we're on the subject of insurance, another type of insurance that operators might want to consider is livestock risk protection, or LRP insurance. This is an insurance overseen by the Risk Management Agency of the USDA. Operators are able to obtain some price protection by purchasing a feeder cattle policy that would provide a minimum price for weaned calves or even some calves that have been backgrounded. This is a subsidized insurance that might be useful to consider. You just need to call your crop insurance agent and ask about LRP insurance. We also have an MU extension guide that provides information on this type of a policy as well.
That's good to know. Another question just popped in for you. It is, here it is. In the case of a drought and unintended culling is needed, who would make the decisions of which cows to cull and who would receive the money from the culled cows?
So if it's a shared agreement, depending on the stipulations in the lease, those decisions would be made by the operator, the owner, or both parties. So also going along with that, monies received would be split the same as the shares in the lease agreement as it was written. So If it's a cash lease, generally, then those type of agreements, the livestock owner is not participating actively in those agreements, and those decisions will be made by the operator.
All right. You were talking about the liability insurance, which made me think about just the general risks associated, with livestock production, that cattle can get sick and lose economic value, even die. On the other side, cattle can destroy things like fences and machinery left in the pasture. So how can these risks be accounted for in a lease?
So you are correct. Livestock production is very risky. Livestock leasing means that two parties, the livestock owner and the livestock operator, now have risk. I suggest that each person knows the risk they have and manage that risk. I say manage because you can't totally get rid of risk. It's too expensive if it's even possible, but you can manage that risk. The livestock owner has the risk of their livestock not being properly cared for or losing value over the course of the agreement. They may want to specify certain activities, such as maintaining a minimum body condition score. If the cows become too thin, either more purchased food needs to be provided by the operator, or the lease can be terminated. So the livestock operator puts these types of safeguards directly into their leasing contract. The operator might want to consider price risk to be the most important risk to manage. They can manage price risk with LRP insurance, as we mentioned earlier, or with forward contracts, hedging in the markets, or financial reserves that allow for flexibility in feeding and marketing. But all these price risk options are actually independent of the leasing contract. They would not be a specified activity in the contract. If the cattle owner is concerned that the operator won't have sufficient cash to pay a cash lease, they need to specify that the rent be paid early in the leasing season.
Okay, good to know. So leases usually assume labor as a responsibility of the operator or the tenant. Is that always the case?
Not always. Property owners can provide some labor. If a livestock lease is giving the livestock owner the opportunity to gradually get out of livestock production, the livestock owner may want to keep watch over the cattle, particularly if they are close to his home or on pasture that he owns. They might like going out and checking the cows daily and making sure the fences are in good shape, but might not actually want to repair the fences or the water system. They would just communicate the need to the operator. One of the benefits of a livestock lease is the operator, particularly if it is a new operator, can take advantage of the skills and experience of the older livestock owner. It can be a great mentoring relationship, and those relationships can be very close and satisfying as both see their objectives and needs being met.
You mentioned Missouri MU budgets as helpful. Are there other sources of information that someone could use? Like, for example, this is one of our questions here. Where would a person receive the lease forms, or a spreadsheet for determining how the lease share should be split?
Yeah, two great resources for that. Ag Lease 101 has a wonderful guide sheet on cattle leasing, and they also have a fill in the blank style lease that you can use and modify to your own purposes. Another spreadsheet that I really like to use is the University of Nebraska has what they call their calculator. Very funny. But it's a wonderful spreadsheet that can determine what a share lease would be and also what a cash lease would be once you put in all of your input costs and kind of anticipated selling prices of your cattle. So both of those tools, Ag Lease 101 and the University of Nebraska calculator, are what I would recommend.
Excellent. Thank you. And I've been wanting to ask this the whole time. Are there other livestock being leased besides cattle?
So I have not dealt with other livestock leases directly, with the exception of equine leases, which are a totally different beast. However, the principles discussed in the cattle lease examples tonight would also apply to any other species of livestock, such as sheep and goats.
All right, great information tonight, Katie. And I will say you are instrumental in putting in some of the resources together that folks can have access to. So I wanted to give you a shout out on that. If you guys have any more questions for Katie or follow up on any of her answers, feel free to reach out. And as always, we put her contact information on our Canvas site. So thanks, Katie, and thanks all of you for joining this evening. Next week, we'll have Denise Ferguson. She'll be talking about hunting leases. Until then, have a good week.